Kupina kuphi emakhaya emadolobheni nasetkomplasta khona siyanemukela siphinde sinemukele futhi ehlelweni Yilungelo Lakho, it's your right. Silethela lo hlelo bukhoma lapha ke kumahamba phambili SABC 1 Mzansi for sure. My name is Simpiwe Ngqongwana. Thank you so much for joining us and I'll be with you for the next hour. Khumbula ke mbukele ukuthi njengenjwayelo sitakunika ke isikhathi sekuthi nawe ke ulese imbono yakho khona lapha ngekuthi ke usishayele ku 011 714 6918. Ungasiphinza kusithumele ke i-email ku consumer@sabc.co.za. Ungaphinza kusithole na ku Facebook. Kanti ke leli lilungelo lakho. Well, it's a matter of days before new mayors and ward councillors are sworn in and knuckle down with the business of delivering services to communities. Now, given the huge expectation created during the campaigning, residents can't wait to see those promises and, of course, manifestos translated into quality services for all. But as a voter or resident, what steps can you take to improve service delivery in your area? And what can you do to improve local government accountability in your ward? And how to hold a ward councillor who is not in touch with the needs of your community accountable? Well, to tackle these and other local government issues, we are joined in studio by, of course, Lucky Siabe from the South African Local Government Association and Ilona Tip from the Electoral Institute for Sustainable Democracy in Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. It's a great pleasure having you on Yilungelo Lakho this afternoon.
Thank you for having us.
Now, ballots have been cast and voted in arguably one of South Africa, if not South Africa's most hotly contested election since the dawn of democracy in 1994. Is that where it ends for the voter, though? I'm going to start with you, Lucky.
Well, for the voter, it's actually the beginning of a 5-year relationship with the newly elected councillor. Because as of tonight, once the final results have been pronounced, Day one begins for councillors, where they have to come and be sworn in. They will first be inducted, especially the new ones, to make them to understand, what their role is as councillors. Because, they've been campaigning, promising people, all the promises. Now we're going to induct them to, teach them and capacitate them to say how do they carry on with their mandate. And as I've said, it's the beginning of the relationship, meaning that if you've elected that ward councillor, from tonight until the next government elections, that person is going to be your representative in the local municipality, making sure that all your social infrastructure and any other municipal needs are attended to.
Right, right. Now, Ilona, most of residents see the last of public office bearers once they elect them. Is that where it ends, though, for the voters?
No, I think, as Lucky has said, it's the beginning. But I think an important factor to remember is that democracy is more than just voting. And as a citizen, you also have a responsibility to do something after you voted. So I think many people sit back and think, well, I've done what I had to do, I'll come back in 5 years' time. And then people are disillusioned and complain because things have not happened. But I think it's, democracy is about people having the right to be informed about their lives and what impacts on their lives, and to participate in the decision-making that affects their lives. And, that's to develop that relationship with your councillor to enable you to do so.
Absolutely. Now, before we get deeper into this conversation, tell us what your organisation does.
My organisation is a not-for-profit organisation where our head offices are in South Africa, but we work across the continent.
Okay.
At the moment, we have 9 offices in various countries in Africa, including Somalia, Central African Republic, etc. And our focus is elections, democracy and governance. So working with electoral management bodies, civil society, political parties, members of parliament.
All right. Lucky, the role of SALGA is to, transform local government, to enable it to implement development agendas. What exactly is the role of SALGA? Well,
that is our mandate. Our role is we're the representative body of organized local government. As you know, that municipalities, is over 270 of municipalities in the country. Our role as SALGA is to serve as the representative of those municipalities. For example, as an employer body, at the bargaining council, we represent municipalities for, wage negotiations, conditions of service of all employees in municipalities. But our role extends over, 5 other areas. We provide capacity building to municipalities, both councillors and officials. We provide capacity building. As I've said in the introduction, from today we come in, to start inducting them, but it doesn't end there. In the coming 5 years, we'll be providing capacity building to, municipalities. We also represent local government at Parliament. We serve as the representative of organized local government at the NCOP level. And then we also, play a role of, improving the image of local government.
Right, right. Now, in the 3 tiers of government, just how critical is the local government?
Local government is very critical because that is where service delivery takes place. So it is very important that local government works together with the provincial sphere as well as the national sphere, because at the end of the day, any service delivery, for it to take place, it takes place at the local government level. So local government is very key for the cooperative governance arrangements that we have in the country.
Right. So, Ilona, what are the duties, the roles and the responsibilities of ward councillors?
Well, ward councillors have several roles, but essentially they are the interface between the community and the council. And their job is to, listen to the community and to make sure that the needs of the community, as far as possible, are adhered to. They have various other roles. They facilitate meetings. They have a very strong oversight role of what the council does and what the officials do, such as the municipal manager, etc. So they play a very important role in seeing that what the officials of the municipality are employed to do, that they do them. And that they carry out the tasks in the way that they can. And that's why, things like, capacitating them in budgeting, because many people may become councils and never had to look at drawing up a budget. There is what the development planning, spatial planning is also, they've got to give input. But essentially what they are, they're the link between the community and the council, and they're the conduit, through which community needs should be expressed.
Now, having said that, on the issue of budgets, does that particular councillor have to have a certain experience in handling budgets, or I mean, what's important? Is it that he has to deliver services?
Well, you can only deliver if you, first of all, understand the budget, because, understandably the needs of our communities are very great. But, people may ask for X, Y, Z, but if you have no idea what is in the budget and how a budget works, you can't effect it. But, many people may become councillors who haven't got this experience yet, because essentially, as a citizen, I've identified somebody that I feel understands me. And that's the person I vote for, because I want them to be able to express what I'm feeling.
Absolutely.
But, through organisation, institutions like SALGA and others, they are then, are able to go through some kind of training to understand. You don't have to be a chartered accountant, or an actuarial scientist in order to be able to do that, but you do need to understand. But, I think we forget that day to day we budget. Even if we have very little money, we look at, say, we've got, okay, I've got R2 in my hand and I need to buy this and I need to buy that. How am I going to do it?
Right.
So, in a way, we're all familiar with it. This is just a larger scale of something that you may know on a very basic level.
All right. Well, hold that thought. We'll definitely continue with our discussion after the break. Sure. Asasise ngidlula ngasetolo senasemandi niphinze hlanganyele nathi nasibuya emva kwaleli khefu. Siphinde sikwamukele futhi mbukele ukhumbule ukuthi nawe ungaba ingcenye yalolu hlelo ngeke usishayele licingo ku 011 714 6918 noma ke ku 011 714 6919 ungaphinze kusithumele ne-email ku consumer@sabc.co.za noma ke usithole ke kuma social media platforms ku Twitter naye ke ku Facebook. We are continuing with that discussion of how to hold your elected ward councillors accountable in the spheres of service delivery. Now we have our guest Lucky Siabe from SALGA and as well as Ilona Tip. Now Lucky, Does our system make space for holding councillors accountable? Does South Africa have a formal recall mechanism just in cases where the residents are not satisfied with their, with the performance?
Yeah, I think let's look at your question twofold. Before coming to the recall one, the first is how do we keep them accountable? Remember, a councillor, is a representative of the community. Mm-hmm. He's there as a communication link between the community and the municipality. Okay. And, legislation does provide for, they are required to consult with their communities, to be in constant consultation. Now, what the law has done is that we have established what we call ward committees in particular wards. And councillors, by law, are required to be chairpersons of those ward committees. So they must hold regular ward committees, so that, they report back to the communities, in terms of the work that they do. In terms of their accountability, remember with the political system in the country is that we elect political parties. But in a situation where you have elected a councillor and, you feel that they are not accountable, you can always go and report to the office of the Speaker, because councillors report to the Speaker in terms of the work that they do and also in terms of their consultation with their constituencies. On a quarterly basis, they have to report to the Speaker. So if a community feels that their ward councillor, is not, responding to their needs, they are free, to approach the office of the Speaker in their municipality or the office of their mayor in their local municipality and raise their concerns about, their local councillor.
Is it feasible, though? Because we know that there's just so much red tape getting to the mayors or,
Well, almost over 90% of municipalities in the previous administration had ward committees. That's what we do after every elections. The only challenge is that, after elections, you don't get a great level of participation in the ward committees. Or people get elected in ward committees and they're not consistent. They don't consistently, attend meetings. But it's one of the challenges that we're looking at, as SALGA, where we're putting in mechanisms, to capacitate those ward committees and make sure that, people have an incentive to participate. Because the other thing is that in the ward committees, you don't just necessarily participate as an individual. It's actually sectors that get represented. You'll have the church, business, NGOs, because the ward councillor in any event has to work with an array of people in their particular ward.
Right. Now, Ilona, I know I'm going to touch on a very, a subject that's probably close to your heart, that of gender stereotypes. Now, women have historically been underrepresented in decision-making structures. In the few communities globally, wherein the leadership is mostly comprised of women, do you agree to the notion that the efficiency and efficacy of service delivery in those communities is optimum?
Look, there have been studies done in many communities. For example, in India they did a study of just the production of a community, and where there were women that were put in charge of production, be it farming, etc., there was a vast improvement in the delivery, because it's the woman who has to make sure that the children eat at the end of the day, or that there's food on the table for their family, that there's money to send them to school. So they would actually be able to produce more efficiently and more effectively, because they worked into a system in a very different way. They didn't take time off for lunch or etc., because if they had to meet a target, because they had to know they had to deliver. So certainly, I think, it's a bit of a misnomer to say that, if a woman is there, it's going to be perfect, although I'd like to believe that. Because I think we are human beings like anybody else. So there are some women that are outstanding, there's some women that are less outstanding, but there certainly is a different perspective when you have women involved. And, but, I think people often think that gender, or the issue of gender, is women only. It isn't. It's, you've got to empower women, but you've got to empower men. Because men need to also have an understanding and an acceptance of the fact that women can have a say in a community or in a structure.
But
and
so many
gender
activists don't seem to agree to that notion.
I think they do. I think people that are really engaged in gender issues do. And you know, I know, for example, we do some work in Madagascar, for example, with newly elected members of parliament, and we've facilitated the establishment of a women's caucus. But we work with men and women in parliament. When we look at, you know, preparing a budget with a gender perspective, we, you know, have men and women engage in that topic. At EISA, we've recently produced just to go back to the budgeting, two manuals, and we've been doing training with some political parties, one on gender budgeting and one on youth budgeting. You know, and just so that get people beginning to engage in that and say, okay, if I need to be represented or have my interest represented, how do I do that? You know, there's a certain sum of money. It can't all go to A, B, or C, or D. How best do we distribute it that it's most efficient for us all?
So basically, when it comes to voting, playing the gender card is misguided, isn't it?
Not necessarily, because, you know, you have to. And in fact, in the recent elections, there was a stipulation that there had to be a certain percentage of women, and some parties internally ensured that every second candidate was a woman, or every third, etc., in order to do that. So no, you have to bring the space and provide the space for women to come to the fore. But men need to understand that they have to also accept and appreciate that women have a contribution to make.
Alright, ukhumbukele mbukele ukuthi sinicela ukuthi nisishayele noma ngisendele bo email nema messages ku Facebook. Sinaye ke umbukeli lo chamuka kamashu anonymous siyakwemukela.
Hello siphothi njani?
Siyaphila kunjani sisi?
Ngiyaphila.
Yes, ngakusida.
Nibeka ukuthi ugovernment siyawavotela amakhansela akhe sivotile kuyimanje ayawina la ihostela kamashu lenkatha le esivotelayo khona kodwa kayenzi lutho akanandeleli lutho futhi ukuthi iyona iyasebenza yini uvela beka abantu nje bajika lapha abantu abenza umsebenzi.
Alright, siyabonga kakhulu sitawucela ukuthi lakhi ke awuphendvule lo mbuto ukhala ngekuthi bayabavotela ke emalunga abo eParliament noma ke kuma councils but ababasithi ngalutho.
Yeah,
I think lenzaba ke ibuyela ekutheni ke how do we take them accountable, or is there a formal recall mechanism?
Yeah, njengoba ngingasho ukuthi masicela ukuwakhetha amakhansela kumele asebenze nomphakathi, and the first thing ekumele ukhansela ayenze iwardini yakhe mancela ukum-elect ukuthi kumele establish i-ward committee. Le ward committee izawuconsista of various sectors bomphakathi, you know, so that then on a regular basis, at least every second month or every month, ward councillor over a meeting ne ward committee la azotshela i-ward committee ukuthi what are the issues kamasipala, and then what are the issues ezomphakathi eyena azimukise kamasipala, because you must remember ukuthi ward councillor yena kahle kahle uwumessenger uyihambisa ama issues we community kumasipala, and every quarter ward councillor kumele abize ama ward meetings la a reporter back kumphakathi. So I think it's also up to umphakathi to make sure ukuthi bayamtshela ward councillor ukuthi no sifuna i ward committee, from a ward committee every 3 months kumele sibe ne ward meeting la councillor zo reporter back in terms of ama needs umphakathi. For example, makwenziwa i budget ne yaka masipala kumele abize umphakathi bakhulume ngebudget ukuthi thina as i-ward how do we benefit out of i-budget yaseThekwini, for example.
Ngiyathemba ke anonymous lapho kamashu so sitakele ngalo ndzaba, and this discussion is getting very intense and very interesting. Remember to keep those calls coming and those Facebook messages. Let's now take a break, and we'll be right back with more after this. Welcome back, and this is Your Right, Yilungelo Lakho. Remember, our participation lines are now open. You can call us on 011-714-6918 or 011-714-6919. Our email is consumer@sabc.co.za. Ngaphinda usithole ku Facebook na ku Twitter. On that issue, let's now take a look at all your Facebook messages that have been coming through. Pumlani Hamson says, when they need votes, they come crawling, but once they get voted, they become untouchable. Exactly the issue we've been discussing when it comes to recalling of your candidates. Now, Atando Mpopana says, Msagazi, udala saqhathwa ngabantu abaphezulu. So mazlimez yetsheni into ephambili kukuxhithana nje ngezikhundla yokubed eMzansi. Then Ari Helped Ngakese says, hayi lapha kwelizwe kudlalwa ngabantu abavotayo, kukho izethembiso ezingafezikeyo. Lekhuta Mbele says SALGA represents municipality for what? Because they come because when it votes, but after that they did not work. I'll leave that to you. No,
SALGA, we've done a lot of work in the previous administration, and also in the past 20 years. SALGA has done a whole lot of important work in terms of legislation. There's been a number of laws that have been legislated to help improve on municipalities. Issues around the financial management. We've made input around financial management and capacitating municipalities around their finances, councillor training, councillor induction. The past 20 years as SALGA, we've been doing a lot of work, getting councillors to be capacitated. Also, if you look at the financial management, your audit outcomes, I mean, the graph is going down. You're seeing more and more improvements by municipalities, in audit, in their audit performance. When it comes to municipal labor relations, we've been able to get general industrial peace. There's been a number of strikes in municipalities, but they've not been as great as they were, 20 years before. So, on a whole, in terms of the mandate of SALGA, in representing the sector, our view is that we have done well. We have also produced, a 20-year report, which will be sharing out with members of the public. But, we do welcome any criticism. If, members of the public feel that, as an association, maybe we should have done more to get some of our members into line, we do welcome that type of criticism. Yes.
Now, Ilona, I'm going to come back to you later in cases of protests, like protest to voice discontent and what it says about communication at municipalities. Now, like independent candidates, is it constitutional for independent candidates to stand in more than one ward?
No, you can only stand in one ward. It can't be in more than one ward.
Yeah, because we do get reports that in some areas, independent candidates can stand in just more than one ward in the context of implementing working policies in multiple wards at the same time. I know it's not covered by specific clauses in legislation governing elections, but the issue is it constitutional or not? Because we've seen those in South Africa.
Well, I don't know of any specific example. All I know is that a ward councillor will get elected in a particular ward. But political parties have got a way in which maybe their representatives, oversee numerous wards, especially in a case where a political party has not won that ward. Let's say Party A won the ward and Party B did not ward, 3 wards, but maybe they just elect a shadow councillor who will oversee the work in those 3 wards. But you cannot have a person representing 3 wards. It's not allowed in the Constitution.
Right.
If there are 2 things. One is, remember, local government, we vote for a person who may or may not come from a party or may be independent, and we vote for a party that's PR.
Right.
So you will have, a lot of the parties might have people standing in different positions, and depending where they're successful, they'll either go on the PR list or the individual candidate list. But wherever you are, if you're elected to a ward, that is the ward you represent. You cannot be elected to more than one ward.
Yeah.
You can only be elected to one ward. That's what you oversee.
So what do you make then of the rising incidence of protest action in terms of discontent?
Yeah. Look, the space, I suppose in a way, the democratic space has opened. So there is space for people to voice their discontent. And I think people resort very often to violent protests when they feel that their voice is not being heard. But often people don't realize that they can actually do a whole range of other avenues to try and get their grievance heard. So sometimes people have tried it and they get frustrated and they say, well, we're not going to try any other mechanism because it doesn't work. Or they don't even go that route because they're so angry and frustrated. For example, we've seen protests over, after communities had 3, 4, 5 days of no electricity. People are then very frustrated and angry and are not going to go and raise a petition, go and look for their councillor, go and look for their mayor. They're just fed up. You know, it's freezing cold and they want electricity. So I think it's often because people feel they don't have a mechanism by which to air their grievance. If those mechanisms are, and they are there, they're not aware of them and they don't feel that that they can use them.
Is it though an indication that we are just out of touch with our councillors?
No, you know, the question of violent service delivery protests, there's a myriad of factors, you know, that that influence that. I mean, let's start with our history. I think generally we come from a very violent history. I think that's the first thing that we have to acknowledge. But we are not saying that because of our history, people have to be violent. But there's also been elements where criminals take advantage of the grievances of communities, and they use, you know, a genuine, you know, grievances and protests, you know, to, you know, deal with their mischievous criminal deeds. But there's also the question that, you know, municipalities, especially in urban areas, because of the growing level of urbanization, there's also increased demand, you know, on service delivery. And municipalities can only do so much with what they have. You know, I mean, for example, in Gauteng, there are people migrating, over 10,000 people a week, they're coming into Gauteng. So, you know, the levels of demand for services is increasing on a daily basis. But I'm sure that municipalities are taking steps, you know, in terms of trying to also look at alternative ways in which they can raise additional revenue, you know, to meet some of those rising service delivery demands. But I think it's a culture, we as a society, I think, you know, the religious fraternity and other NGOs, we need to come and nip it in the bud. You know, this is a democratic society. The era of violent service delivery protest, you know, we've just elected councillors now. You know, so we cannot, let's raise our issues with councillors. Let's use the channels that are there, because the channels are there, but unfortunately, in some instances, you know, there's some elements, you know, criminal elements, which take advantage of community frustrations.
Yeah, and especially with the incoming committees, we need to nip that in the bud before it spirals out of control. We've got another caller, John from Middleburg. Sagomungela, baba. Siyapila kunjani baba?
No, i-concern yami ingwani. Ngizwa abantu bakhala ukuthi if bavotela i-council kumele zibaqashe. I-council zilapha bebizwa sivotela i-council ukuthi zikhona ukunceda like i-service delivery, like i-sponsori, into eziningi, not to say ngivotela ukuthi kumele ngiqashe. No, for i-service delivery kumele nje bona basinede ngokusilungisela i-road, indlela, basifakele isikontiri, basinede futhi maybe if kune-problem bangayenzi lento bayenzile ukuthi basikhephele abantu esingabafuni, because labantu bavotelwa yiphi. Kumele bahlangane nathi icala basho ukuthi no, ubani omuntu benimfuna, uyabona? Yebo baba.
So John, kulo mmango lokuwo solo waqala nje ukuvota, ngitiphi nje inkinga lo wabanato?
No, mina up to so far everything happy ngayo, because service delivery amanzi akhona, yonke into bayasilungisela, yabona? Anginayo iproblem ngama-council.
All right, siyabonga kakhulu ngekushayela John. Yeah, John in Middleburg is basically saying that ever since he started voting, he's always been happy with his representatives at committee, at councils, because they only vote just to you know, to put ahead the service delivery, not for jobs or to provide jobs to their council leaders.
So, go on.
Yeah, I think, you know, the role of a councillor, in as much as we just have to provide, you know, basic service delivery issues, the reality is that we're living in a South African society which is faced with huge challenges. It's not just in terms of services, but there's also, you know, jobs. People don't have jobs. People are unemployed. So it's also a duty of a municipality to create conditions, you know, not to create
the jobs. Create the environment.
To create
an
conditions and enabling environment
seek to provide
for
jobs.
business to grow in a community so that people then can start their own businesses. Because it should also not be just about getting a job, but to also say, how do young people, for example, in a community, come together and then establish a car wash? Or do, you know, a garden service, you know, where they can even outsource their work to the municipality or open a cleaning company. You know, but you see, and today's society, we're also living in a society of technology. So municipalities is not just about roads and water and picking up the litter.
Right,
they want Wi-Fi. You know, young people want to have access to Wi-Fi. And, you know, unfortunately, our municipalities ended up having to roll out that at huge costs.
Right,
because it's not just the hard stuff, you know, roads and water. Roads and water is important. I'm not saying it's not important. But I'm just saying today's society, there's a myriad of other elements that come into the mix.
Yeah.
I think the demands are so high, you know, as you say, and the needs are so great. Sure. And remember, you know, if you think about it, we've only had local government really for what? Just not even 20 years, because we had the transition period from 95 to 2000, where we were actually still working with the old system and starting to introduce a new system. Sure. So we've only introduced now the new system, where we also had to take councils and areas that were totally under-resourced and underdeveloped. And, you know, try and match them with areas that are more resourced and more developed in order to help them grow. So that's why we have, for example, district councils, where we take a lot of little councils together who on their own are not going to manage it, and try to put them together and pair them up with greater ones. But, you know, one can understand people's frustration, because, you know, if I've been waiting for a house or haven't had electricity, of course I get angry and I want it. But we also have to remember that certain things are within a councillor's control, and others are not. You know, for example, housing as such is a national issue and a provincial issue. Councillors certainly have a role to play in terms of allocation of houses, etc. But I think that, you know, understandably people are angry and frustrated, but we sometimes have to stand back. But I think one of the most important things is the communication. If we don't inform people, then we will then guess what we think you think.
Yeah. And I guess the central theme is municipalities should play a key and leading role in spurring development in municipality. All right, for now, let's take yet another break. Stawuphinda sibuye naletinye tindzaba emva kwalokho. Welcome back. This is Your Right, Yilungelo Lakho. Ganzi-ke sinake Jabulisile ulapha eNewcastle. Jabulisile, siyakumukela. Ngathi usilahlekile Jabulisile. Sesitawuphinze siye ku Jerry. Jerry, siyakumukela ehlelweni.
Yebo, ninjani baba?
Siyaphila kunjani baba?
Ngiyaphila. Nginenkinga kulabantu amakhansela athi mabebiza ama-meeting awabize ngegama le-ANC or DA whatsoever. That's why uthola ukuthi abantu abaningi abakhona ukuya to those meetings.
Right. All right, siyabonga kakhulu Jerry.
Yep.
He's got a major problem about those council meetings that maybe are called ANC meeting or DA council meetings, yet they haven't voted for that particular party into office. What do you make of that?
I'm not sure if I understand the question.
Maybe say that there's a community meeting called by the African National Congress or by the Democratic Alliance, and most people do not attend those meetings because they don't align themselves to those parties. Yeah.
Well, I mean, you've got to, I think, first ask, and Lucky can come in as well, what is the purpose of the meeting? I mean, Lucky was talking about the fact that councillors have to report back. They're accountable to their constituency. So if, for example, the DA or the ANC call a meeting, one might assume that they're calling the meeting in order to report back to the people that voted for them as to what has happened, which is different to a council meeting being called or a councillor being, you know, through a ward committee reporting back to a public meeting. Because when a councillor reports back or there's some change going to take place in the council and they call for public meetings, that's open to the public, everybody goes. But because I voted for somebody, I expect them to answer me and to report back to me. So, you know, they don't prevent other people attending. People may not feel they want to attend because it's not the party they supported. Right. But they have, those parties have got to report back to their constituencies, because if they don't, we're going to complain and say the councillor doesn't ever tell me anything.
Right. So I guess the callers the caller's claim is that those parties hijack the public meetings, which are not meant for the party members, but for the entire community. Sibuyele kuJabulisile ulapha eNewcastle. Sakumukela Jabulisile, sawubona.
Allo futhi kunjani?
Siyaphila mama njani?
Siyaphila.
Into ngakusitha ngani namhla?
Into engiphatha kabi siyavota lokusaqala uvota ngabo 94. Kodwa intuthuba siyiboni la ngakithi eKZN eNewcastle eBlue Bush eWard 16. Inkinga ekhona amakhansela anabantu bawo. Inkinga ekhona mawunezingane wena engasebenzi sihleli singabo mama singabafelokazi ingane ayisebenza yile ema-university. Ingane zethu lezi uhulumeni athi uyazibhekelele kunoma ibhekelele ikhonjwa ngenjumbane ifuna ukubulawa ziyalwiswa umsebenzi aziwutholi aziye ema-university kodwa lokhu sibhizi siyavota singabafelokazi asinabo baba ingane zethu umsebenzi ayikho imisebenzi ikhetha abanye imihlangano ayibizwa yebo khona ukuvota siyavota uhulumeni sibechazizwe asisavoteni namakhansela akhe akhona la sesivoteni inhlangano kamkhulu ngoba vele sithanda iANC ngoba ayikho intuthuko la nje Blue Bush manje ngafika futhi kakhulu nondinankulu akaziyizi la ngithi simkhonjela le kude even itransport sincisha ukuthi sigibele bese yobeka uvo lwethu sibike njengezakhamuzi ezivotayo kodwa mafanele izivote ngena emakhaya namakhaya uthiwa asivoti kodwa mase kuthiwa nakho ke manje sekuwiniwe ke manje kulokho ngisacabanga ngisho nezikipa zaziwe ukuthi shone phi singabogogo singabomama singabofelokazi akho ngisho ini zinomuntu oyiphethe lokho uhulumeni yingane ngakusukumela asibhekele khona ukuthi kwenziwa yini asibiza khulume nathi ukuthi ngani khona lentanga nikhetha yini enisiza ngayo asizakali ngalutho thina la
so make Jabulisile ukhala ngale party lo wayivotela noma ukhala ngalo khansela lo nisebentelayo
iparty iyona eright ngikhala ngamakhansela amakhansela nje ngikhala ngawo nje ayikho intuthuko kunoma kube khona intuthuko kukhonjwe ingane zethu ngenjumbane ezami nje ngezinye kazakhonjwa ngoba kuthiwa ngizemifeni ngawunyuka ngomsebenzi uANC
Okay, siyabonga kakhulu maye kusishayela. Jabulisile, our caller from Newcastle, is basically taking us back to the issue of service delivery, because she's basically saying that the party that she's voted for, which is ANC, she was quite bold and proud to mention that party that she voted for is the ANC. But it's the ward candidates, I mean, it's the councillors who are failing to deliver the services.
Yeah, no problem, Mama Leo at 16. I think just if start to vote that much. Mabenze show ukuthi bona at 16. The councillor ought to win in that ward. They make sure that they hold him accountable through one of political parties wabo. You know, because Mama, it sounds like we are as a party umuntu involved. I think through a party if I belong to a party, what councillor is required to be the committee meetings or to report regularly. I think it's, you know, a question you're reporting back to the community. I think it's a recurring problem. I think it's one of the issues ourselves as SALGA are going to take up and say maybe how do we help and capacitate what councillors, you know, to start being visible, to start being out there in the communities. I think the previous call, meeting as political parties, I think it's not even in the code of conduct. What councillor magabiza a meeting? Ubiza a meeting as your what councillor, not as a political party. I think it's one of the things in our induction, as we found some what councillor, especially La Amasha, to say when you call a community meeting, it's a community meeting, the branding. It must be the municipal branding. Branding your office got speaker. It should not be a political party meeting. Magafuna biza a meeting as a party. We ask to na Sundays work. One more party meeting. But the community meeting, they can call it community meeting, but they must not brand it as a political party meeting, because I think it's one of the issues. As in abantu ba confused with much the meeting, a Congo laws or a meeting what council. You know, it's one of the. I think it's one of the institutional capacity things that we are going to put in place to assist the councillors, because sometimes they may be doing it unknowingly. You know, yes.
Now, on the issue of communication or the lack of it at communities, why do you think that problem is so rife in townships, especially disadvantaged townships than at affluent suburbs, for example?
You know, I mean, partly because in affluent suburbs, as you say, you've got Wi-Fi, you've got access to all sorts of means of communication. I mean, elsewhere you have perhaps your mobile phone, and, you know, that's about all. But also, look, it takes time. You know, to call a meeting, to talk to people, to hear what they're saying, takes time. And sometimes people, you know, are either busy or they feel it takes too much time, they're not going to give it that much time, which is a pity, because if you don't hear what people are saying, you know, it's more costly not to listen to people and talk with them than it is to talk with them and spend time with them, because the cost, for example, of 19 schools being burned down is far greater than having taken the time to talk to somebody.
True.
So there is, you know, I think, you know, also then perhaps councillors also feel overwhelmed and have so many other things to do. They feel they don't have the time to do this. They've got to do A, B, C, D instead, which is very, you know, unfortunate. But also citizens, you know, can do something. They can, you know, write a petition. They can prepare a list of grievances and take it to the council. And as Lucky was saying, you know, the issue of recall, if you have a councillor who represents a party, and they're not doing their job, your recall is to the party. You go back to the party and say, here is Lucky, who's not doing his job. You know, I want you to change him.
Also, you want to recall me.
Exactly.
Hi, Babugeli, and our message to all the incoming ward candidates and councillors, they should be busy. You should be busy after taking up office in as much as you were during campaign stages. Let's now take our final commercial break. Do stay with us. Welcome back to our very last segment. This is Your Right, Yilungelo Lakho, and we continue with our discussion. How to hold your elected councillors accountable in terms of service delivery. Let's now take a look at your Facebook messages that have been coming through. Sina Luyanda Mbata Guko. Utsige yena, what can citizens do when the councillors are not delivering on what they have promised? Victor Mfekane, Utsi, in our metro, people were already shortlisted for employment. Will the new party not delay the process? I think that has to do with the transition from one party to the other. And Talwando Velem, Utsi yena, ndicela ukubuza ukuba xa sivotile silutsha na siza kufumana na jobs ePort Elizabeth Woma. Andile Mayeki uthi msakazi sivotile ngase isithembiso zabo bazifekezise abantu abaninzi abasebenzi nosebenza intenayo kutyiwa nje imali engcobo esithebe. Uthi kudliwa nje imali nje.
Yeah, you know.
Uthi kudliwa imali kumasipala.
I think some of the comments, of course, I think people just bathumela nje ama comments, because let's all understand the role of a councillor, the role that a municipality plays. I think let's respond to some of the questions that relate, I think, to the one around the jobs. I don't think elections are going to affect job applications. No, it doesn't. Because councillors do not employ people.
Okay.
They're just a political oversight. There's the administration. Of course, there may be... So
the transition of new committees does not affect the recruitment of personnel?
I mean, if you have to hire someone to go and fix water pipes, that process continues. The only challenge may be at senior management, which is natural to say, maybe the new party may come in and want to employ their own municipal manager and things like that.
Yeah.
I think it's everywhere in the world that we should give them due, but also the current ones, they've got employment contracts. So any new party that comes, they have to respect, you know, that existing contract, and the normal transitional, you know, arrangements will continue. But insofar as service delivery, we are sure that service delivery will continue. There will be no victimization of staff because there are laws regulating these issues.
Mane sesiphelele isikhathi sina Dumsane elicingweni ulapha ke eDurban. Dumsane siyakumukela ehlelweni sawubona.
Sawubona futhi njani?
Ngiyaphila kunjani Dumsane?
Sikhona futhi siyabonga kakhulu ngeno hlelo ngibingelele uTip na uBhutu lakhe. Ngezwakala ba?
Yeah, siyakuva. Uthini umbuto wakho Dumsane?
Yeah. Ngisacela ukubeka into isizathu senza kube nokungaqondi kahle kwabantu ukuthi mphathi wohlelo sidalwa yini. Isizathu ngana kwethu i-reason idalwa ukuthi there is that lack of communication between the council community that they are representing. Okuyiyona nto main point ka politics, communication. Ama-councillor awabuyi back enze ama-public meetings ne-society so that bezokwazi i-society ukuthi i-government imi kuphi. Okunye okwenza isimo sibe worse is to do ama-public meetings on Wednesday. Kwenza abantu besemsebenzini. Enye into njengasey'ndaweni zasemakhaya. Siyazi in our history ukuthi abantu basemakhaya bakuphela kwenyanga. So if wenza wena meeting ngomhla ka-15 phakathi nenyanga abekho abantu basemakhaya lento yenza ukuthi abantu baphuceke ulwazi ngalesikhathi abantu bengaphucisekile ngolwazi kube futhi kunama-ward committee angekho political wise ngoba it doesn't end there lapha kwikhansela kufunakala lapha umuntu oyi-ward committee abe-political wise azi ukuthi i-government isebenza kanjani so abantu bezoba nolwazi ukuthi abantu bona bebhekisela amakhansela benza imihlangano benziwa abantu
Maneke sesingesikhathi Dumisane siyabonga ukusishayela Dumisane. Basically in a nutshell he's saying that most councillors do not understand the needs of communities and I would like you to answer that briefly in 30 seconds.
Well, you know, community meetings are important. Our councillors, the new ones who are going to capacitate them in terms of communication will build their skills to be able to not only communicate but also to use social media.
Yeah.
Because there's also social media, I mean.
Sure.
Yeah. Briefly in 30 seconds, Ilona, how do we improve local government generally?
Yeah, well, I think it's an effort by everybody. You know, it can't just be your councillors going to do it or nobody else. You know, and there have been many questions on the Facebook as well as to how do we hold our councillors accountable. You know, firstly, I mean, which like is mentioned, is the ward committees. There are supposed to be ward committees in your area. They're supposed to be drawn from amongst the community, but many of us may not know about it. But they have that role. Then there's also the opportunity to go to the council officials, you know, identify the line manager for that particular thing. If you don't have sanitation, who's the person I speak to?
All right.
You know,
I'm afraid I
just wanted to end and say mainly exercise your power as a voter because that's your power at the end of the day.
Absolutely.
You know?
I couldn't agree with you more. That's where we end our show today. Thank you so much for watching and many thanks to our guest Ilona Tip and as well as Leseane from SALGA. Thank you so much for joining us. Please join my colleague Alicia Jali next week for yet another live consumer affairs discussion from Miss Mpio Ngongwane and the rest of the team. Till we meet again, Yilungelo Lakho. Bye-bye.